Sable Island, an island whose inhabitants change as often as its dunes. Despite having had 400 years of free time between its discovery and its protection beneath the safe umbrella of Parks Canada, it has still never experienced a permanent settlement. This being said, the island was certainly never alone. From explorers flowing out of opposite ends of the world, to a massive colony searching for the perfect new home, to visiting scavengers looking to exploit lost shipwreck goods, Sable saw it all as one century turned to the next. And yet, nearly every would-be settler came to the same conclusion. Sable was beautiful and full of riches to make profits from. But the dangers and inconveniences of living on a sandbar far outweighed the benefits. One by one they came, and one by one they left, leaving marks on the dunes with the bones of their structures, only for those marks to fade and be quickly forgotten as shifting sands buried them deep within the belly of the island. The first documented people to stumble across the little North Atlantic sandbar was a group of Portuguese explorers led by a man named João Alvares Fagundes. Fagundes was an explorer and shipowner coming from Viana do Castelo in Portugal. He and his small crew were exploring the Maritimes during the year 1520, specifically the regions of Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and the St. Lawrence River. There are records that say the man named Sable Island Fagunda after himself, but the name was never repeated by any other person or culture afterwards, so it is likely the idea died with him without having made much of an impact. Next comes the French colony, led by a man named Troilus de Meguay, Marquis de la Roche-Heglomarche, who was attempting to colonize the New World in 1598. In March of that year, the Marquis discovered Sable Island while on a fishing expedition, and despite the fact that the island had no proof of previous attempts at colonization, and the wreck of a European ship greeted him from the island's shores, the Marquis was certain that it held great promise. However, when he sent a letter back to France, dreaming of the profits that could be made from fishing and a fur trade, and asking only for 100 experienced French infantry, he was denied. The king gave him permission to take up to 250 people, but there was no one willing to sail to this small, deserted island off the coast of a relatively unknown mainland. The Marquis, however, also happened to be the viceroy of New France, and was determined that this island was perfect. Eventually, he was given permission by the king to harvest criminals and beggars to use as lab mice for the new settlement. The criminals had been told that they would be sailed to the island for free and liberated of their charges back in France, so long as they worked for the new colony. In the end, between 50 and 60 of these outlaws were placed on Sable Island, along with 10 soldiers and a small selection of food, clothes, tools, and weapons. Commandant Carbonnier was left in charge while the Marquis continued his exploration. This simple supervision was supposedly enough to keep the criminal settlers in check. Unfortunately, it quickly failed, as every settler on the island was constantly robbing one another, and occasionally committing crimes much worse. The Marquis made an effort to sail back to the island in that same year, but was unable to find it again, and returned home to France empty-handed, assuring himself that all was well. Meanwhile, the settlers struggled to stay alive, surviving off of mostly cattle, fish, and seals, as well as the yearly supply ship that supposedly brought clothing and wine. They only stayed for 2 years, but were barely able to survive, realizing that a life spent in jail was probably preferable to time spent alone on such an unforgiving island. Across the ocean, the Marquis found himself falling out of favor with the court. His plans for Sable were forgotten, with supplies cut off from the island colony in 1602. The next year, a ship was sent to rescue Carbonnier and the other leaders. It was then that they realized just how badly the colonization attempt had failed. 11 settlers were still alive when the ship came, and just barely. They ran to the shores wearing raw sealskins, filthy and nearly starving. They showed their rescuers the means by which they had stayed alive, the makeshift forts made of shipwreck remnants, and the underground dens they had built under the sand, for lack of stone and wood, to protect themselves from the elements. Carbonnier and the other leaders had perished, though it was thought unlikely that they died of natural causes. The criminals were returned to France and given a small compensation, never to touch foot on the island again. The plan was abandoned entirely by the next leader of France, King Henry IV, and so Sable was left in its own wild peace. During the 2 centuries that followed, the occasional visit would be made by a colony, either by accident or with grand hopes for the island. From Basque to Spain to England and New England. Plans for Sable included military outposts, a middle ground for trade, a new settlement, or a mine of resources such as sealskin, furs, and oil. None of these endeavors were successfully followed through, though, and those who stumbled upon the island by chance found themselves searching for ways to leave. Sable was more often a large, inconvenient obstacle in the Atlantic Ocean than a destination in of itself. Because of this, it saw many ships come to an unfortunate end on its shores. Around the middle of the 18th century, herds of livestock such as cows, sheep, hogs, and horses were introduced to the island, with the expectation that they would prosper and help to set up a more livable environment for the next settlement. As time went on, most of Sable's livestock either perished naturally or were consumed by the island's visitors over the course of the next 2 centuries. Only the horses survived, but they soon flourished and rapidly became one of the most iconic and widely appreciated elements of the island. Finally, in 1801, Sable experienced the installation of its first long-term structures and the landing of its first true settlers, even if they never thought of themselves as such. Most of the buildings that were erected at the beginning of the humane establishment still stand today, even if they are in the process of being buried by constantly moving sands. The research buildings, storehouses, and residences form a sort of settlement of their own, much stronger and more cared for than any of the island's previous foundations. The people who worked on Sable, saving the lives of shipwreck survivors, cared deeply about the island and found both purpose and reason to stay. Sable is in a constant state of change. Its size and shape fluctuate. Every one of its dunes wanders around the island. Its biodiversity evolves and varies. And it has seen so many different stages of human evolution, beginning from the 16th century. Something must be said, however, that it took 400 years for civilization to look past its harsh outer shell and take the time to make it habitable, so that we could appreciate and protect it for generations to come.